Good morning, church. And thank you so much for having me here, the privilege and the honor of being able to speak to you, bring the message today. And thank you for the hospitality that you've shown me. I have felt so welcomed, treated, spoiled. You really have been so kind, and we really appreciate your love for me over these last couple of days. And it's great to see what God's doing amongst you. Been hearing stories of what God's doing in the prisons, hearing stories of what God's even doing in Kigali through you guys, seeing what God is doing amongst you as well. It's one of the privileges that I have. I get invited to preach at various churches, and to see what God is doing, it's so encouraging. You know what? Jesus is building his church. And it's so nice to see that in the various parts of his church. And today, as MP said, we are continuing in your family series. We're going to be talking about when emotions overwhelm. And it is true that emotions can overwhelm us on the one side, on one extreme, and right at the other extreme is when we don't even allow ourselves to feel anything. But we want to get to a stage where we manage those emotions, and I hope that'll become clear. I'm going to be talking about negative emotions in general. We haven't got time to go into the specifics of things like anger and anxiety and depression and guilt. Those are the four main categories of emotions, negative emotions. But I'm going to be talking about emotions in general. And it's stating the obvious that living in Zimbabwe can be challenging. Is that right? And dealing with two currencies, the inflation, Zimbabwe has become so expensive, hasn't it? Our ZESA issues, the roads that we drive on, all of those things cause us to stress. And then on top of that, we experience the general stresses of life. Running our own businesses, dealing with schooling and our children, trying to raise children in a social media age. Quite stressful, isn't it? And then in addition to that, there's the various things that happen to us, the events that happen. We grieve for various losses that inevitably come our way. Our bereavements, loss of a job, loss of a relationship. And in addition to that, I would say that most marriages suffer challenges at some part in their journey as a married couple. In addition to that, there is these challenges that we experience cause us to worry, to have anxiety, to be frustrated, to have anger, and times of feeling down and depressed. Is that right? Does that happen to you? Well, the good news is this, folks. If you're experiencing those emotions, you're normal. It's quite normal. And it's so important that we learn to manage those negative emotions. It's really part of a subject of the whole mental health issue, and mental health has become so important recently, hasn't it? It's become a topic that's been raised in importance, and managing our emotions is just part of mental health. Mental health includes emotional, psychological, social well-being, and we would want to add spiritual well-being. And today, we're just talking about emotions, one aspect of mental health, rather. Today, we're focusing on emotions. We're all aware of the concept of IQ, aren't we? You might even know your IQ. I don't know if you do. I've never been tested. And we view IQ as something that is important. But are you aware of your EQ, your emotional quotient? And there's some who have a very high IQ, but a relatively low EQ. And I would say that they're not as effective as someone who has a relatively low IQ, but a high EQ. So what I'm saying is that perhaps EQ is more important than IQ. So what is EQ? EQ is defined, it's defined as an awareness of our emotional states and that of others around us, and the ability to manage those emotions in an appropriate and a healthy manner. And I have to say, gentlemen, that in this area, our women folk are generally better than us. They generally have a higher EQ than we do. I think we have been conditioned to believe that we shouldn't feel these things, that cowboys don't cry, that we need to keep those things to ourselves. I think sometimes we're a bit afraid that things might get out of control, and we like to be in control. And so generally speaking, I think that our women folk are better in this whole EQ than we are. But we can learn, that's the thing. And so this morning I want to cover 4 points in dealing with this whole thing of managing emotion. Of course, it's a huge topic, and I'm just going to deal with those 4 areas. So the first thing that I want to say, and I want to emphasize it, is that negative emotions are normal and natural. We're so, indoctrinated into believing that somehow if we feel depressed, or we feel anxious, or we get angry, there's something wrong with us. We don't have faith. We're not being a proper Christian. But we are made in the image of God, is that right? And God is an emotional being. God feels, and we feel. And I want to look at a whole host of scriptures. I'm not going to take a long time over these, but let's look at the emotions that God has. Deuteronomy 9:20. The Lord was angry enough with Aaron to destroy him. Psalm 7. God is a righteous judge, a God who expresses wrath every day. 1 Samuel 15. God says, I am grieved that I've made Saul king, and that he has turned away from me. Zephaniah, the opposite of that. He takes great delight in you. This is such a great scripture, isn't it? He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. Isn't that a lovely thought? His joy. But again, the opposite. Genesis 6, the Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Isn't that interesting? So here are the emotions that God experiences: anger, wrath, grief, delight, rejoicing, grief again, pain, all emotions that God himself experiences and feels. What about Jesus? You will know of the times when Jesus expressed his feelings. The most famous one is quite a disturbing account, isn't it? When Jesus walks into the temple and he starts clearing out the temple. John chapter 2 says, in the temple courts he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned the temple. And he said, you have made my house of prayer a den of thieves. He was angry. Is that right? And a scripture that's not so well known, but when in John chapter 3, Jesus asked him, which is lawful in the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But the people around about him remained silent. He looked at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. Mark chapter 6, Jesus landed on the land, and he saw a large crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Compassion. And then sadness. Did you know that Jesus gets depressed? That's a thought, isn't it? And here's an example. Towards the end of his ministry, he overlooks Jerusalem, and he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who sent you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers a chick under her wings, but you were not willing. He's grieving. He's sad about what the hardness of the hearts of the people in Jerusalem at the end of his ministry. And then when Lazarus died and Jesus comes in, he delayed his arrival, and he sees Mary and Martha weeping. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. And so what we're saying is that God and Jesus himself are emotional beings. They expressed what they felt, those negative emotions as well. There was the time, even in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before Jesus died, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. He had good reason to be deeply distressed and troubled. He knew what faced him. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And so Jesus shows a wide range of emotions: anger, compassion, frustration, longing, rejection, joy, sadness, anguish, and sorrow. And the point is this, is that God made us in his image. And so like him, we are emotional beings. We experience both positive and negative emotions. And our emotions fluctuate widely depending on what's triggered them, the events that have been happening. So generally speaking, positive events lead to positive emotion. Negative events lead to negative emotions. But it is our emotions that largely determine whether our lives are pleasurable and fulfilled or whether they're miserable and unhappy. Our emotions play a major part in determining the quality of our life. But we've been conditioned to believe that these negative emotions are wrong. Isn't that so? That if we had faith, we wouldn't have these negative emotions. And so the first thing I want to say is this, is that negative emotions are normal and natural. They just are. I use the analogy of a door. A door is a door. It's a neutral. It's not wrong or right. What you do with the door matters. You can close it quietly or you can slam it. Our emotions are normal and natural. However, what we do with them does count. We need to manage them. And so the second thing I want to look at is, what do we do with our emotions? And so I want to look at 4 things that we do. The first 3 are the unhealthy ways that we manage our emotions, and the 4th is what we should be doing with our emotions. And the first thing that we do with our emotions is suppress them. We stuff them. We bury them. Why do we do that? Why do we not want to feel those emotions? I think part of it is that fear that we might lose control. They might overwhelm us. And we might be embarrassed because we've been taught that these things are wrong and childish. But here's the thing, folks, that if you bury an emotion, you don't bury it alive. You don't bury it dead, you bury it alive. That emotion doesn't go away. And that quite often it accumulates and accumulates and builds, and you'll know that. So if you bury an emotion, you bury it alive. It's not a healthy way of dealing with emotions. But so often as Christians, because we believe that they are wrong, that's what we do. I've got to be a good Christian, full of faith, and therefore not be angry or anxious or depressed. The second thing that we do with them is we repress them. This is a kind of a deeper level. It's usually a result of trauma or long-term abuse, when our emotions are maybe too painful to bear. And we cope with that pain by repressing all knowledge of the events that have caused those emotions. And repression is common in families where there's been sexual abuse in the past, or alcohol abuse, or violence. And we numb ourselves, if you like. It's a way of coping. I can't cope with those feelings, and so we repress them. But the consequence of that, just like repressed emotions, they don't die. They're not dead in there. They are alive. And there will be consequences. They don't disappear. They might be coping, but it might help us to cope, but they don't ultimately go away. Inside, that repressed emotion becomes a wound that festers. And often the antidote to that pain is to medicate, to use some chemical or compulsion, some sort of addictive thing that will make us feel better. It's not healthy. And then the topic of today is when these emotions overwhelm us, when that emotion takes control. When we suppress our emotions, we kind of overly controlling them. When emotions get out of control, they overwhelm us. They are in control. The emotion controls us. It's when that negative emotion determines our behavior. We become that emotion. So I become an angry person, or I become an anxious person, or I become a depressed person. And the negative emotions controls and dominates our lives. And obviously that's what's given these negative emotions the bad name. So we so often engage in repetitive expression of that emotion, but all that does is feed that negative emotion and it grows. So those three things, to suppress, repress, or allow them to overwhelm us, are the negative ways of dealing with emotion. So what should we do? What's a healthy way of managing our emotions? What should we be doing with them? And we talk about expressing. That's acknowledging the emotion to ourselves and to others, and to be able to express it. So we say, face it, feel it, express it, and let it go. So face it and feel it is to recognize what you're feeling, admit to the emotion, identify. It's quite a good idea to try and name it. Those 4 categories of emotions: anger, anxiety, depression, and guilt are 4 categories. They're broad categories, but within each of those categories, there's everything in between. So anger might be a slight irritation up to a huge rage. Anxiety might be slightly nervous to full-on panic attack, and everything in between. And so what we need to do is to try and identify what it is we're feeling. I know when early on our marriage, when my wife would ask me what's wrong, I would give the standard answer, nothing. Well, nothing. You better know what it is. But the truth of the matter is, I actually didn't know what was wrong. I was immature, low EQ, didn't know. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't quite know what it was. And I've had to learn to know what it is that I'm feeling. And that takes practice. Even us men can learn to do that. Learn to identify and name the emotion that we are feeling. So face it. Allow yourself to feel it. Get in touch with it. Allow it to happen. Don't run from it. Facing and feeling our emotions can be painful and distressing. But if we don't do this, remember, we'll pay for it in compound interest later. If you bury an emotion, you bury it alive. And here's the thing, folks. Emotional maturity is not determined by denying our emotions, which many Christians do because they don't believe it's right, but rather the integrity or the honesty with which a person lets himself experience the full range of those emotions and manage them appropriately. That's emotional maturity. It's being congruent, if you like. And then we need to find an appropriate way. So to face it, feel it, but then we need to find an appropriate way of expressing it, getting it off our chest. We say a burden shared is a burden halved, isn't that so? And so there are various ways that we can express our emotions. You need to find ways that will work for you. So talking to a friend can be very useful, can just express what it is that's going on inside of you. Please find a friend who's not going to tell you how you should be feeling, who's not going to put a stop to it. Because so often, when we express our negative emotions, it makes people feel uncomfortable. And because they feel uncomfortable, they want to put a stop to your expressing your negative emotion. Find someone who will accept what you're saying and feeling. Of course, talking to a counselor, where you should be a safe place where you can express exactly what you're feeling. Prayer is just amazing. It's talking to God, as in the Psalms. I'm going to talk about some of the scriptures just now. Talk to God and tell him what you're feeling. You're not telling him anything he doesn't know anyway. And then you can talk to the trees. If you want to go for a walk and just get it off your chest, no one in particular. In counseling, we sometimes use a tool. We call it the empty chair. If expressing your emotions to somebody might not go well, you can imagine the person in the chair and talk to them as if they were there. It's just a technique of offloading. Writing can be hugely therapeutic. A diary or a journal. Somehow, writing, I don't understand why or how, but but there's some sort of a connection between our brain and doing something physical that enables us to get in touch with what we are feeling. And I've had many people, I know some people who are not desk people, and they're more practical, but they've started writing and just found it so helpful to be writing what they're feeling. And you can write that journal as a prayer to God. Lord, this is what I'm feeling today. This is where I'm at. I'm so worried about whatever it is. But you're expressing to God, and writing can help enormously. Writing letters can help a lot. Just don't send the letters. We have at the counseling center, there's a prayer garden in the corner. It's a lovely area which my wife developed, and there's a cross in the corner. And sometimes it's for people to go and use whenever they want to. And sometimes people will go and spend time before the cross, and they will write things and nail them to the cross. It's a way of expressing and giving it to the Lord. So writing letters, drawing pictures can be useful. Just a way of expressing again what's helping. And then sometimes we need to express what we're feeling to a person in terms of confrontation. But I would say do all these other things first before you go and confront someone. And so those are various ways of expressing what we're feeling. So face it, feel it, express it. And we see this in the Psalms. They're great examples. I think that's why we relate to the Psalms. Because as they express their emotions, we identify with that. Isn't that so? There's something that resonates within us. So let's have a look at some of them. David expressing his anger. May those who seek my life be like chaff before the wind. May their path be dark and slippery. May ruin overtake them. May they fall into the pit to their ruin. That doesn't sound like a nice, gentle Christian, does it? But he was angry. Again, let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the grave, for evil finds lodging among them. David is angry. Is that right? And he's talking to God. In the same psalm, Psalm 55, David expresses his extreme anxiety. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me, and horror overwhelms me. That's where he's at. That's deep emotion, isn't it? Psalm 42, we know Psalm 42 because we sing it. As the deer pants for water, so my soul longs after me. You know that song? But did you know that that's a psalm about depression? My soul is cast down within me, he's saying. He asks the question, why are you cast down, O my soul? Tears have been my food day and night. He's depressed. Then in Psalm 32, the author of the psalm talks freely about his guilty feelings, how those guilty feelings make him feel. I think it's such a graphic description of how we feel when we feel guilty. We feel lethargic, energyless, like on a hot day. He says, for day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you. It did not cover up my iniquity. He's talking about his guilty feelings. And so we can relate to these psalms because they expressing what they feel. And by the way, most of these psalms are prayers or songs to God. And so they're expressing those feelings to God, who knows what they feel anyway. Like I said just now, you're not telling him anything he didn't know already. But as they cry out to him, as they turn to him, as they tell him how they feel, they're asking God to intervene in their situation. So we need to face it, feel it, express it, but then, so important, we need to then let it go. So for example, be angry, but don't stay angry. And forgiveness is really the letting go of the anger. Forgiveness is not being angry. Forgiveness is being angry and then letting it go. And it's not wrong to be angry, but it is wrong to stay angry. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's okay to worry. Jesus worried just before the cross. But it's not okay to stay worried as we give it to God, as we tell God, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and thanksgiving, present your request to God. Then once you've done that, leave it there. That's the trick. Leave it there. And as you confess your guilt before God, accept His gracious forgiveness and let go of the guilt. So it's so important that we do allow ourselves to express what we feel, but then we let them go. Vital. The third thing I want to say about our emotions is this, is that while our emotions in themselves are neutral, they should not determine our behavior. And there's so much in that particular area. David expressed his anger, as we were reading just now. Let death take my enemies by surprise, and so on. But it's interesting that twice David had opportunity to kill his enemy. And what did he do? He had mercy on him. God forbid that I should lay my hand on the Lord's anointed, he said. And so here's the point. He was free to express his anger, free to tell God how he felt, but he did not allow that emotion to determine his behavior. Does that make sense? In this regard, we are called to obedience, whatever we feel. We are called to love our enemies. How do you feel about your enemies? But I say to you, this is what Jesus says, I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those that abuse you. And if someone's against you and behaving like your enemy, then you're likely to feel angry yourself. You're likely to feel afraid maybe, or maybe you're sad that they've rejected you. But whatever, there's going to be negative emotions about your enemies. But Jesus says, love them anyway. Don't let your feelings determine your behavior. Loving your enemy, by the way, doesn't mean feeling all mushy about them. It means acting in their best interests. It means blessing them. Even when you feel afraid, or you feel angry, or you feel sad that they've rejected you. Love them. Another example where the separation of feelings and behavior is important is when we feel anxious. Generally speaking, anxiety and avoidance go together. We tend to avoid the things that we're anxious about. And so that means we are allowing our feelings to determine our behavior. I know someone, for example, who was writing exams and put off. It was an online exam, and they put it off for months because they were afraid of failing. And they were afraid of what their parents would think should they fail. So anxiety produces avoidance. And we often struggle to share our faith, don't we? Because we're afraid of what people will think. We're afraid we might know the answers to questions they may have. And so often we allow that fear to determine our behavior. It stops us. We avoid sharing our faith. But Jesus commanded us, go into all the world and make disciples. So we use an expression in terms of anxiety, do it afraid. Do it afraid. Just do it. When you avoid, it empowers the fear. The fear grows. When you do it afraid, you push that barrier back. It diminishes. So the fourth thing I want to say about our emotions is that we can use these emotions to bring positive change. And I want to talk very briefly about change in our circumstance and change to ourselves. And again, they are huge topics, but I'm just going to touch on some of them. So we can allow these negative emotions to bring positive change in circumstances in the areas over which we have control. And that's such an important point, folks, because there's so many things over which we have no control. And so you can't do something to change something that is outside of your control, so don't try. But there may be things that are in your control. So for example, anger, if it's handled constructively, can lead to a critical conversation that can lead to a change in relationship. It can be the anger that motivates you to do something about that relationship. Does that make sense? Or maybe anxiety and worry that causes you to do something about it. Maybe I'm worried that I am not going to be able to pay my bills at the end of the month. I'm going to run out of money before the month runs out. And that anxiety can motivate me to do something about it. I realize I've got to have to get a different job or get a different qualification, something that would enable me to do something about the thing that I'm worried about. Does that make sense? Again, it's only in those areas over which you have control. Depression, where we feel so sad, it can be the thing. Depression really is despair. Depression is when we give up on something. But depression can be the thing that helps us to focus on the hope that we have in the Lord. We become conscious of His eternal plan and the great hope that He gives us. And of course, guilt can lead to a change in lifestyle. Does that make sense? If we take on board where we really are guilty and we do something about it, we'll change what we do. And then, again, very briefly, I want to talk about how emotions can be used to bring positive change to ourselves, an inner change. And so we say that these negative emotions are like lights on the dashboard. They signal emotions. They wave a flag and say there's something going on. We have a little Peugeot 306, and recently the red light was coming on telling us that it's overheating. And we would be foolish if we just did nothing about that red light. We had to do something to fix our little Peugeot 306. And likewise, when this red light is flashing, when these negative emotions are being displayed in your life, you need to find out what it is. And these negative emotions are a signal to unconscious goals. Not talking about conscious goals. A conscious goal is when you wake up in the morning and say, well, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, 3. They're conscious. But these subconscious goals are the goals, the things that we have determined to do subconsciously to try and satisfy a need, a legitimate need. We have legitimate needs to be loved, to belong, to be valued, to be significant, to be accepted. But when we look to the things of the world, to people of the world and things of the world, and to our behavior to satisfy those needs, we will end up being angry, anxious, depressed, and guilty. And so turn it the other way around. When you are feeling those things, ask yourself, what is the unconscious goal that is at work here, that is being displayed? And again, haven't got time to go through it in detail, but we say anger is a blocked goal. When there's a subconscious goal at work, maybe I have this unconscious goal that my wife should love me like I need to be loved. And she's not. Therefore, I get angry. And I say, why am I angry? It's a blocked goal. She's not giving me what I need. My problem is I'm trying to get my need to be loved met in a human who can't love me like I need to be loved. And I have to say, this is a goal that shouldn't be a goal. And I have to drop it and say, Lord, that's a desire. I would like my wife to love me. I would like people to love me. But I'm going to let that go, and I'm going to look to you. I want to know how loved I am to you. So anger is a blocked goal. Anxiety is an uncertain goal. So if I walk into a room of strangers, of people I don't know, and I'm feeling very anxious, there's an uncertain goal at work. And what's the goal maybe? Maybe the goal is that I be accepted by all these people, that I don't make a complete fool of myself. What am I doing? I'm looking to get a legitimate need met in people. And they might have their own agenda. They're not necessarily going to give me the acceptance and the value that I crave because I'm looking in the wrong area. Does that make sense? So when I'm feeling anxious, the question is, what's the uncertain goal that is at work here? What's the need that I'm trying to get met? And should I be trying to get this need met in this way? And allow that to bring me to the place, to the foot of the cross, and say, Lord, forgive me for looking for value in people. Forgive me for trying to get their acceptance and their approval when I need to be coming to you where I know I can get your acceptance and your approval, and I know my value in your eyes. And so on. Guilt is where we've missed the mark, where we feel like a failure. And very often we try and live up to the expectation of our relatives and people around about us, all the shoulds and the musts and the oughts. And I have this thing that I've got to meet all those expectations because otherwise I'll let them down and then they won't like me or they won't value me. And I realize that I'm feeling like a failure because I have a goal at work that I feel like I've missed. And Lord, I should be trying to please you, not trying to please everybody around about me. And depression is an unreachable goal. When I get to that point where I despair of ever achieving. So sometimes I might be in a relationship where a goal is blocked and blocked and blocked and blocked and blocked. Eventually I'll despair. It's never going to happen. Never going to happen. And I need to ask myself, what's the goal, the subconscious goal, the need that I'm trying to get met, that I've despaired of ever getting? And let me get that need met in the Lord. Does that make sense? So we're saying that negative emotions are normal and natural, and that we need to learn to manage our emotions. We do that by facing it, feeling it, expressing it, letting go. Don't allow those negative emotions to determine your behavior. And by the way, this has so much relevance in the whole woke culture, the woke world that we live in, where people say, I feel like I'm in a man's body or a woman's body or whatever. So that's what you feel. But don't let that determine your behavior. And then finally, these negative emotions can bring change. Change in circumstance, where we have control, but maybe more importantly, change in ourselves when we realize that we are trying to meet legitimate needs in an illegitimate way. We're trying to get our needs met in people or things or in our behavior, and it doesn't work. And so we experience the negative emotions. Shall we pray? Father, I thank you that you know us through and through. You know us through the core of our being, and so often we don't know ourselves, Lord. So I pray that by your Holy Spirit, you will reveal these things to us. Help us to see, Lord, where we maybe are suppressing or even have repressed emotions. Give us the courage, Lord, to before you be able to feel these things, express them, and let them go. And I pray, Lord, that you give us the courage to bring change where we can. And particularly, Lord, that you use these negative emotions to bring change in us. Help us, I pray. We ask these things, Lord, in your name. Amen.